I'm Marcia Foer, and I'm a Vietnam veteran. And I'm honored to be here with you today, and I'm very grateful that you're here with us, meeting inside this incredible dream, in this house that the General built for all of us, and for all who follow us, actually. And I'm always drawn to my favorite inscribed quote in the glass above us. Let the generations know that women in uniform also guaranteed their freedom, that our resolve is just as great as the brave men who stood among us. And with victory, our hearts were just as full and beat just as fast, and that tears, they fell as hard for those who left behind. The history of women serving in the U.S. military is as old as the country itself. Sponsored by Vietnam Veterans of America, many here will not know its history or how it began. So this is where I'm going to begin our conversation. Vietnam. Times were different during our war. These were ones of discord and a lack of national unity. There was an unpopular military environment. This didn't exist in our country's most recent past wars. Much was boiling up on the streets and in discourse. Turmoil at home against the establishment, social and cultural upheavals, civil unrest, women's rights, the draft, racial conflict was deeply dividing the country. And then along came a band of dissatisfied and disconnected Vietnam veterans. And actually, they were trickling back home from the war. Many were caught up in this unrest here at home. Over the years that the war raged on, many were even sent to Vietnam from the streets of this national unrest. When these veterans returned home from where they had served, they wanted to be treated with respect. They wanted to be heard. So many of their friends had been killed, many right by their side. They wanted more than they were being given at home. Discontented with the medical care and the benefits they were receiving. They were seen as ungrateful and disruptive losers. This was by many who even knew them. Some were often met with a lack of acceptance into the traditional veteran service organizations. It was in this atmosphere that this band of Vietnam veterans began communicating with each other from all around the country, making it eventually to Washington, D.C. It was here that these malcontents met and laid the groundwork for a new service organization. Council of Vietnam Veterans began its work. And so it was that Vietnam Veterans of America was born amidst the turmoil and discontent of the times, embracing Vietnam women as equals, equal partners. This was where the story of VVA began. They believed it was reasonable to expect just and equitable delivery of health care with oversight in a system that provided the coordinated and consolidated delivery of those services. VVA found its voice and took ownership of its own destiny. The early years rolled on, and the organization flourished, growing strong, gaining respect over time. We established our place within the wider veteran service organization arena. All of us working together for justice and benefit of our country's veterans. That's not to say we always saw eye to eye, but we all respected each other's motivations and intent. As we ride into the sunset, so eventually will VVA. But no one can ever, nor will they deny, that VVA made a difference in the lives of millions of veterans, and for that we're very proud. Our national president, Jack McManus, wanted to leave a record, actually, of our contributions, of the contributions of VVA by the women of the organization. He felt the eve of this eventful weekend, celebrating the 30th anniversary of the dedication of the Vietnam Women's Memorial, would be a most fitting time, as we have always supported and stood with the project from the beginning of its inception and through the turmoil of its struggle for survival on its way into reality. This afternoon, you'll hear the stories of just a few of the women who changed the landscape for so many, thousands and thousands. And so we begin with special recognition of a few of those remarkable ladies. Thank you. You can follow along with your programs.
Hello, I'm Marilla Cushman. I'm a 25-year veteran of the United States Army, and a proud Vietnam-era veteran as well. I've had the privilege of being in Brigadier General Wilma Vaught's orbit for 4 decades. First as a young captain charged with briefing her about the status of Army women when she was the commanding general of U.S. Army Military Entrance and Processing Command. Next, as the executive director of the Defense Advisory Committee on Women in the Services, and she the senior military representative to the committee. Later, when I was the chief of media inquiries for the Department of the Army, and she generously agreed to speak to the media, addressing investigations and UCMJ procedures. When she was building the memorial, my then boss, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was especially supportive of General Vaught's efforts here at this memorial. And finally, when she called one day in late 1996 and told me it was time to go, like a good soldier, I said, "Yes, ma'am," retired, and I've been a member of the memorial staff since March 1997. General Vaught was a force. She is a force. I knew I had made the right decision when a friend gave me one of those flip calendars where every day has a quote. This one titled, "Wild Words from Wild Women." When I flipped the calendar to my birthday, the quote read, "When I grew up, I wanted to be in charge. Wilma Vaught." It was a sign, right? When Wilma Vaught joined the Air Force in 1952, things were really different. Women didn't go to sea in ships or fly airplanes. If a woman married a man with children, she had to get out of the military. If she became pregnant, she was immediately discharged. If she married a civilian, she didn't get a quarters allowance, nor did she get an ID card, or have PX or commissary privileges, or medical privileges for her husband. And she certainly never dreamed of being a general or flag officer because rank was capped at 05, lieutenant colonel, commander. It was literally against the law. I asked her once why military women in those days didn't challenge those discriminatory prohibitions. She told me they knew if they caused trouble, women would be deemed non-essential, and the privilege to serve would once again be taken away. After all, they were less than 2% of the force and easily replaced. They couldn't be considered more trouble than they were worth. So how did Wilma Vaught overcome these institutional challenges? First, she picked her battles, identifying which she could win and those she couldn't. And secondly, in her own words, she said, "I worked longer, harder, and smarter." She knew that as a woman, she'd be scrutinized personally and professionally more than her male colleagues. She was always on her guard, knowing it would make a difference not only for herself, but for other women as well. She understood what it meant to be a role model, as a mentor, and took it really seriously. It was her longer, harder, smarter ethos that got her deployed with a bomb wing to Guam, the first woman ever to deploy with an operational bomb wing, and as she put it, her and 30,000 men, just about the right ratio. According to her boss, she was the best and he needed her, and despite regulations prohibiting her deployment, he knew to successfully accomplish the mission, it was the right thing to do, that it was easier to ask forgiveness than permission, a lesson this young female captain tucked away. According to General Vaught, as a military woman in the 60s, Vietnam was her war, and she needed to be part of it. As soon as it was possible, she filled out her dream sheet to go. When orders came through, she requested weapons training, but the answer was, not needed, you're a non-combatant. Going to a combat zone, and I don't even have skills to protect myself? Well, that's crazy. Undaunted, she had her brother-in-law teach her how to fire a handgun and a rifle, and then she talked her way onto the rifle range, qualifying and receiving her expert marksmanship badge. Arriving in Saigon in her skirt and hose, she reported to the arms room to sign up for her issued firearm, only to be denied. But that's not the end of the story for Wilma Vaught. She was moving into a room in the billets of a woman who had been there during the Tet Offensive. In a bureau drawer was an AK-47, and in another, ammunition. If it's the right thing to do, don't give up. It's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. General Vaught's tour in Vietnam was from October 1968 to October 1969. She never used the AK-47. Working longer, harder, smarter, she promoted below the zone, quickly moving through the ranks and stepping into increasing levels of responsibility. In one incident, she was assigned an audit in a remote facility, only to be advised she was to be sent back because the facility didn't have a woman's restroom. In typical Vaught practicality, she asked, well, do you have a restroom? Response, yes, but it only has one stall. Vaught, does it have a door? Response, yes. Vaught, well, I don't see the problem. Either you're in it or you're not. She proceeded to conduct the audit, and all was well. When Wilma Vaught retired in 1985, she was the senior woman on active duty in any of the services, and she was a legend, known across the services and at the highest levels of the Department of Defense for her hard work, trailblazing career, and mentorship of the men and women under her command and beyond. Her hallmark quality, integrity. I still take calls from folks who worked with or for General Vaught, expressing their gratitude for her investment in them, many of whom are general and flag officers, GS-15s, and SESers who achieved great success in their endeavors. What a legacy of this woman. Not long after she retired, she was asked to join the committee that was working to build a memorial honoring the service of America's military women. She accepted, but let them know she wasn't interested in a leadership role. She wanted only to provide critical general officer advice and assistance to the effort, because her plan, now that she was retired, was to make $1 million and travel around the world space A. Many of you know, after missing a meeting, she was informed that they had elected officers and she was the new president, a position she held proudly for 30 years. So today, we are in this awesome place, lovingly and reverently called the house that Wilma built. This 33,000 square foot memorial and education center chronicles our collective 2.5 centuries of service, and today preserves and tells the individual stories of nearly 310,000 of us. a number that grows every day, and it is here, we are here, because of Wilma Vaught. While projects such as this take a village, the village was expertly and successfully led by Wilma Vaught. She'll humbly tell you she had no experience in construction, fundraising, negotiating the many layers and entities of the federal government, and on and on. What she used was the many skills and lessons she learned in her nearly 29 years of service in the United States Air Force. But I'll tell you, after watching this remarkable woman for 40 years, I don't believe it could have been done without her. She came to know it was the right thing to do, knew when to ask for forgiveness rather than permission, and worked longer, harder, and smarter to make it happen for us and for America. Her intellect, skill, perseverance, and integrity brought people alongside of her to make it happen. Presidents, first ladies, cabinet secretaries, and the like came on board too, all led by this little farm girl from Illinois who graduated in a class of just 15 kids from a tiny rural school. Wilma Louise Vaught, who changed the face of Monumental Washington and gave it a woman's face. So I could go on, but I know you get the picture. While she was indeed a celebrity, General Vaught celebrated the service of every single one of the 3 million of us who served. To her, it didn't matter if you were a 4-star general or admiral, flew fighter aircraft, or didn't get above the rank of private. Your service mattered, and she let you know it. So thank you for lifting Brigadier General Wilma Vaught as one of the Vietnam servicewomen you celebrate today. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kate O'Hare Palmer, the Women's Chair for Vietnam Veterans of America, and I have the honor and privilege to talk about Diane Carlson Evans. Known her a long time now, and it's like, I'm so glad to see you here. It's impossible for me in 7 minutes to talk about you, Diane. And I think that I would hope that everybody has read her book and has followed along with her history. And I'm going to hit just some highlights of this because that's all we can do here. But we do this with love. So Diane Carlson Evans served for a year in Vietnam as a trauma nurse on the surgical burn wards at Vung Tau, and later as the head nurse of a surgical unit in Pleiku. She came home in 1969 and served stateside, and then went on with her life as most of us did, right? And didn't think about Vietnam probably until late at the night and with talking with some of her friends. But then we fast forward, and Diane attended the dedication of the wall in 1982 and the unveiling of Frederick Hart's three-soldier statue in 1984. In Mr. Hart's words, his statue was consistent with history. This statement left Diane with a nagging question. Where were the faces of all the women? Without the women, this sacred area was an incomplete and inconsistent representation of history. 265,000 women had voluntarily joined the military and had honorably served their nation during the Vietnam era. What would the war effort have been without us, she said. We were together then, and we should be together again. The lack of recognition of women was unacceptable. And you, Diane, you just weren't having any of it, were you? And then that began the long journey, right? And once we got a whiff of it, and the movement had started, we were right there with you. We were all on board. The work began, and it developed some steam. Eventually, it became a locomotive that was rolling all the way across the country, even out to me in the West Coast in California. State coordinators had been identified, and they, in turn, as Diane said, recruited volunteers in all their regions. She said, soon our brothers in arms joined us in our communities. It was women and men together to help build this memorial. And then it got official status and the donations started to come in. The Vietnam Women's Memorial was 10 years in the making. It's difficult to understand and shocking to us that in the beginning, with the vision and increased public awareness, there were so many who opposed it. Hate mails, threats, and angry phone calls poured in. Remember that, Diane? The federal bureaucratic process to get this memorial approved on the National Mall was a tedious and convoluted chase. Diane describes this in detail in her article, Moving a Vision, the Vietnam Women's Memorial, which describes the complex and difficult legislative path that led to the final dedication of the memorial on November 11, 1993. Tenacity overcame adversity, and all of the stumbling blocks were only temporary obstacles. A quote from Margaret Mead has always stayed with her. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world, and indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. 30 years ago, over 5,000 women veterans came to Washington for the dedication of our memorial. And that's what we call it now. It's our memorial. Feelings swirled with expectation, joy, memories, and some trepidation. There were military unit reunions and a parade down Constitution Avenue. The streets of D.C. were lined with thousands of enthusiastic supporters, sharing our overwhelming exhilaration as they waved flags and cheered us all on. Who knew that many of the men would be carrying their medical records trying to find their nurses in the crowds? We were Red Cross workers, intelligence officers, supply, clerical staff, navigation and air support crew, journalists, Stars and Stripes staff, and so many more of us who had served all over the world in this effort. The tears began. The Memorial Mass of Thanksgiving to honor women veterans was hosted by Vietnam Veterans of America, and that brought us together. We could remember our loved ones who had died, and we also remembered all of those who we touched that didn't get to come home. At the candlelight ceremony, with the blessings from our Native American sisters and brothers, our hearts cracked open, some of them for the very first time since we came home. This was also the first time that many of us had recognized our personal struggles with PTSD, and it was through this experience that we finally recognized that invisible burden that had been laid upon us so many years ago. This is the healing and the beginning of what Diane had envisioned for us all. We all went home and the memories began flowing. There were many late-night phone calls, reconnecting with our friends and other people that we had known in Vietnam. The Vietnam Women's Memorial made us visible to the world and began the healing process that we so desperately needed. Diane knew we needed it. We didn't know when we were at that memorial. At the very beginning, a lot of us did not quite understand what Diane had in mind for us, but she knew. She knew what was coming for us late at night and at the beginning of all of those interactions that we started to have, and all those little spiderweb connections that brought us all back together, because we had all gone home and gone to our different worlds, and she brought us all back together. This statue was a touchstone for coming to terms with us and our place in history. We came to learn that our strength and in the creation of the Vietnam Women's Memorial would continue forward through time for those who came after us. VVA was proud to present you, Diane, with our Lifetime Achievement Award at our National Convention last year, 2022. We were so happy to do that for you. The memorial stands as a forever remembrance of and to us all. On this, the 30th anniversary of the dedication of the Vietnam Women's Memorial, we thank you, Diane, for your tenacity, perseverance, and finesse, working in and through the hurdles on your way to the finish line. And remember, we were beside you all the way. Thank you so much, Diane, for what you've given us.
I'm Sandy Miller. I'm the National Homeless Committee Chair for Vietnam Veterans of America. I am not a nurse. I could not do a Band-Aid. So if you hurt yourself, good luck. I'm here to speak about Claire Starnes. Claire was born in Bideford, Maine, and enlisted in the Women's Army Corps in 1963. In 1969, Claire volunteered to go to Vietnam. She eventually became a photojournalist, earning the military occupation specialty of public information specialist. Following more than 2 years in Vietnam, Claire was assigned to the Public Information Office at Fort Monroe in Virginia. It was here she met Ed Starnes, the talented Army journalist who, on April 12, 1973, became her husband. She and Ed left the military later in 1973 to become civilian employees of the Department of the Army. Life moved on. In 2006, Claire and her late husband became the first and only husband-wife team to be inducted into the United States Army Ordnance Corps Hall of Fame. As most of you know, I'm sure that the total of military women who served in Vietnam is still an unknown number. Some say 7,500, others say 11,000, some say none, depending on who's reporting. 90% of these military women who served in country were nurses. Only 10% were enlisted. Undeniably and perhaps understandably, the Vietnam nurses received the bulk of public's attention and accolades. This little-known group of Army, Air Force, Marine Corps, and Navy left its mark in Vietnam from 1962 until 1973, serving in a myriad of duties such as intelligence analysts, flight controllers, clerk typists, translators, dietitians, communication specialists, and photojournalists. These service women were barely known, if at all, to most people back home, except for their military, their family. Few Americans even knew non-nurses were in Vietnam. Sadly, these sisters of ours were truly the forgotten American military women of the Vietnam War. Some were left feeling disrespected and minimalized as a side, and sadly, their comrades at home and around the world who were serving the war effort were also left unseen as an ever-necessary component of Vietnam military action in Southeast Asia. Having served in Vietnam, Claire was hell-bent on bringing justice to the military service and the worth of these Vietnam women, resolving many misgivings and misunderstandings regarding their motivation or desire to serve as an enlisted military woman. She had insight and a deep sense of what these women were feeling and seeking, bringing equality and respect to and for them. In February 1999, Claire and Phyllis Wilkowitz, a former roommate in Long Binh, co-founded the nonprofit organization Vietnam Women Veterans Incorporated, VWV. The VWV's purpose was to find all the line and staff officers and enlisted women who had served in Vietnam throughout the war. In less than 9 months, more than 700 women, living and deceased, had been found. In November, VWV held its first conference in Olympia, Washington. Since those days, we, and I am one, Vietnam-era women veterans, all women veterans have unified and assimilated into a force with which to be reckoned. We are one. In June of 2000, Claire addressed Senate Veteran Affairs Committee concerning the effects of Agent Orange on children of her fellow Vietnam veterans. Claire and members of the VWV joined with VVA on several projects, bringing unity to all of us who served during the Vietnam era. We came together in force to dedicate the Vietnam Women's Memorial 30 years ago today. In late September 2015, Claire published her book, Women Vietnam Veterans, Our Untold Stories. She toured the country for almost 4 years, making her audiences aware of the service of she and her comrades. Claire devoted her life to this cause. She was happiest on her 2015 Spyder motorcycle, and she was hell on wheels as she rode the highways, bringing her message to all who would listen. Her heart was big, and her mission never ceased. When she was traveling in her van, she had live interactions on the internet from the road. She was a guest speaker, invited to speak at universities on the experience of women in the Vietnam War, and she was very proud to have addressed the cadets of the U.S. Army Military Academy at West Point. She never missed an opportunity to record their story for posterity. In addition to interviews statewide, the BBC sent a photojournalist to record her story for publication in England. In addition, she was featured in an exhibit at the, well now, King Charles Regimental Museum in Hull, England. We are grateful to Claire for ensuring the legacy of all women of the Vietnam era. She was selfless in her mission. She was a unique lady. She was my friend. Bless you, Claire.
Hello, my name is Martha Green, and I have been a member of VVA since 1985. And I also am a past president of Chapter 65 in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where I still reside. It is an honor for me to introduce to you the contributions of my friend, the Honorable Dr. Linda Spoonster Schwartz. In 1985, we became aware and involved with the Vietnam Women's Memorial Project. It's hard to believe, to think that 30 years have passed. Since then, Linda has served as a VVA, as a chapter member, a state officer, a national board director, a national officer, and now is the special advisor to the National VVA president. To date, she has testified over 20 times before the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives on behalf of veterans. When one mentions her name, a nod of acknowledgement usually ensues. Linda served stateside in Japan and in Germany, in the U.S. Air Force, retiring as a flight nurse after tragically being involved in an air accident. Her healing process brought her face-to-face with the VA health system for the first time. She quickly discovered the VA was not prepared to deal with the unique needs of women veterans. Recalling this experience when she was told upon discharge she would only be able to go home and bake bread. And the funny thing is, her husband was a baker. Her determination thrust her forward and heightened her motivation to obtain both her master's in nursing and doctorate in public health from the Yale School of Medicine. Recalling her earlier care at the VA, in 1995, Linda accepted an appointment to serve as a member and then chair of the VA Advisory Committee on Women Veterans. She lent her voice and experience to significant dialogue regarding the treatment of care and benefits for women veterans. She learned to become her own advocate, both inside the VA and out, educating other veterans in the artful mastering of red tape. This experience set her on her way, spending most of her entire post-military life in the service for others, primarily that of veterans. Her life has been synonymous with what can I do to help make veterans' lives better. In 1990, she worked to establish the Vietnam Veterans Assistance Fund, serving as its president until 1996 in providing financial help to nonprofit veterans programs for training and housing of homeless veterans. In 2003 until 2013, Linda served as the Connecticut Commissioner of Veterans Affairs, appointed by the governor, overseeing the care of more than 153,000 veterans of the state of Connecticut. This included the operation of the Veterans Home, a deplorably aging structure built in 1933 in Rocky Hill, Connecticut. Having worked in the arena of grants and government funding, Linda worked her magic, obtaining patchwork grants. In 2005, the John L. Levittow Health Care Center was dedicated, providing dignity and elevating the spirits of all the veterans who resided there. In 2010, as state commissioner, she was installed as the president of the National Association of State Directors of Veterans Affairs. Linda was the first woman to hold this position in its 65-year history. As a member, she also had the opportunity to have a close association with the state women veterans coordinators. Because of her outstanding work with the veterans community in Connecticut, she was nominated by President Barack Obama and approved by the U.S. Senate as the Assistant Secretary of Policy and Planning of the entire Department of Veterans Affairs. She was responsible for all matters of policy to promote the health needs of 22 million veterans and their families. She served in that position until 2016. Decades ago, she traveled to Vietnam to attend an international conference about Agent Orange. In 2001, on behalf of VVA and the Yale School of Nursing, Linda organized a U.S.-Vietnam scientific conference on human health and the environmental effects of Agent Orange at Yale University. Understanding that veterans often receive their primary medical care from community doctors, Linda realized that most primary care physicians have little, if any, significant knowledge of the unique medical risk of their military experience. She developed an instructional pamphlet entitled, "Have You Ever Served?" with the intent to educate providers of the implication of military service. Currently, she is one of the VVA team members working on the Air Force Health Study Working Group to assure the viability of the ranch hand specimens for possible future research. Her dedication to veterans and their families began decades ago and continues today. She was inducted into both the Ohio and Connecticut Veterans Halls of Fame. In 2019, as a longstanding member of the American Academy of Nursing, she was inducted as a living legend. Who is Linda Schwartz? She is a veteran leader serving for over 40 years, recognizing the needs of veterans, finding and implementing a solution. Her contributions regarding the health and welfare of the veteran community are the result of her undeniable passion and her life's commitment to them. It is an honor for me to introduce Linda Schwartz.
Joan Fury. Joan was born in Brooklyn, New York, into a proud American family, a working-class, patriotic family. Joan's dad, a World War II veteran, never missed taking her to a Veterans Day or Memorial Day parade, flag waving. He had served in France, and he returned with a diagnosis of soldier's heart. From the beginning, Joan only wanted to be a nurse. She read all the books she could when she was in school, a young Joan. She was a diligent student, graduating from nursing school in 1967. Like many of us here today, Joan's profession, linked to her deep-seated gung-ho patriotism, propelled her to enlist in the Army Nurse Corps. Excuse me. Soon after basic training, she volunteered for Vietnam. In January of 1967, she landed at Bien Hoa Air Base, spending her first night in country under air attack, scared to death, and wanting to be under her cot. Welcome to Vietnam. Then it was off to the 71st Evac Hospital that was in Pleiku, located in the Central Highlands, one of the highest casualty bases in Vietnam War. She spent the year in ICU and the emergency room. And, let me say, many of the nurses who went to Vietnam joined on the student nurse programs. And they had no training in emergency room care or intensive care, surgeries, any of that nature. So they went, and they had no experience going into positions and care that they had to learn, in some cases, from the others that came before them on the units, especially the enlisted men that helped on the floors. For her extraordinary commitment and performances, Joan earned the Bronze Star for meritorious service. For Joan, everything mattered in Vietnam, but on returning home, it seemed nothing mattered. Ultimately, Joan took advantage of her earned GI Bill, and by 1975, she had a bachelor's and master's of science in nursing, giving her a path leading to research on women veterans issues and into the invisible wounds of war suffered by so many. She was now well equipped to focus on her life's mission of service to her fellow Vietnam veterans. This was her driving passion and commitment. In 1978, Joan went to work at Bay Pines in Florida, the VA Medical Center there, where she first began her work in PTSD. Over the next few years, her expertise brought position advancement inside the VA where she was working, which allowed for an increased ability to engage in research. This experience set her on a path that would define the road of her future career. In 1989, she was transferred to the VA Medical Center in Palo Alto, California, as the Associate Director of Education. It was here where she pioneered, actually, the first VA Center of Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder and established the first ever inpatient PTSD treatment program for women returning from war. Soon, Joan was viewed as a national expert on PTSD. She was invited to deliver testimony before Congress and address professional audiences from all over the country. However, to the public, she may be best well known for shining a light on the struggles of women Vietnam veterans. It was through an anthology that Joan compiled with her close friend, Linda Van Devanter. And actually, she and Linda served together at the 71st Evac in Vietnam. That's where they met. This anthology was entitled Visions of War, Dreams of Peace. Fortunately for women veterans, both continued serving after Vietnam. Linda at Vietnam Veterans of America and Joan at the VA. There was no stopping this superhuman duo from completing their mission one way or another. With VVA, there was a movement afoot, and testimony was given with the support of many of the for the establishment of an official VA office devoted to women veterans. Our prayers were answered in 1995 with the appointment of Joan as the first director of VA's newly established Center for Women Veterans. In this position, she also provided technical support to the VA Advisory Committee on Women Veterans, which helped to keep it up front and out In this position, she also provided technical support to the VA Advisory Committee on Veterans, helping to lead it forward in their look at the services that were being offered within the VA. Joan is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Common Cause Public Service Achievement Award, recognizing an individual who, by force of imagination, initiative, and perseverance, has made an outstanding contribution to public interest in areas of government performance and integrity. In 2015, Joan was inducted into the New York Veterans Hall of Fame. She was a rock star at last. However, to her fellow veterans, she is Joan, who stands with us shoulder to shoulder, fighting all the way. To me, she's also a dear friend. Joan, please stand and be recognized.
It's my honor today to be here to talk about my friend, Linda Van Devanter. Before I do that, I just have to make one comment because I'm sure a few of you in the audience probably picked up the fact that I served at the 71st Evac Hospital. Linda served at the 71st Evac Hospital. Diane Carlson Evans served at the 71st Evac Hospital. Now, people often say when they hear that, what was it with you guys? And I said, we don't know. We just figured it must have been in the water. But I am honored to be here today to speak with you about Linda. I am a 40-year life member of VVA because of Linda Van Devanter. It's important that we remember that over the last 40 years, the country's knowledge and understanding of the women veterans' experience and the services and benefits available to us today has increased to an extent that would stun our forebears. Linda, through her work with VVA, was instrumental in helping to achieve these changes and inspired me and countless other women veterans to advocate for ourselves and for the larger women veteran community. And I know that many of you who were influenced by her are out there in the audience today. As a founding member of VVA, Linda established the Vietnam Veterans of America's Women's Initiative, which I believe was the first veterans organization's women's initiative ever started. And she started that to address the unmet needs of women veterans, becoming one of a handful to take on these issues at the local, state, and national level. Linda was a tireless advocate. Through her work with VVA, her outreach, her writing, and her courage in sharing her personal story, she changed the lives of countless veterans. Linda's book, Home Before Morning, was published in 1982. And I like to say it was a memoir, not a mythology. She shared her experiences, both personal and professional, as a young woman and nurse, coming of age amidst a brutal and controversial war, and the impact that it had on her after returning home. She described struggling with depression and anxiety and other disturbing issues, haunted by what she had seen and trying to make sense of all that Vietnam represented to our generation. Today, we call that PTSD. Back then, it was often described as a personality disorder. Her book was controversial. Some women veterans were critical of it, but many others were supportive because they felt she humanized our responses. And she helped us to understand that the flashbacks, nightmares, depressions, and efforts to allay these symptoms through self-medication were part of a syndrome that many war veterans developed, and that we, as women and as nurses, were not immune. She let us know that it was okay to not be okay. She encouraged us to come out of the shadows and make our voices heard. And thankfully, many of us did. Early on, Linda and Lily Adams, another woman Vietnam veteran who I know many of you know, worked through VVA's Women's Initiative with the office of Senator Daniel Inouye of Hawaii to get the GAO, which is the major investigative body of the United States government, to do a demographic study of women veterans' use of VA services. This is the first study that was ever done on women veterans. And the findings of this report was delivered to Congress in 1982 and made it very clear that VA was not delivering even close to equal access to VA health care or benefits to women who had served in the military from any generation. The study made recommendations to address these failings, and by doing so broke historic ground and laid a foundation upon much has been built since. And initially, because of VVA's role in it, they became the clearinghouse for this information so that legislators, researchers, and medical professionals would reach out to them to find out what they needed to know about the women veteran community. VVA was then invited to give congressional testimony regarding women veterans, which ultimately resulted in the establishment of the VA Advisory Committee on Women Veterans, under the Office of the Secretary of Veterans Affairs and required them to deliver a biennial report to the Congress, another step towards beginning to make the changes so badly needed. As a result of Linda's courageous actions and contributions, the prejudices, stereotypes, and discrimination that had impacted women veterans for generations began to chip away. And we saw both veterans organizations and military organizations for the first time begin to change and open up and expand the participation of women within them, as well as to expand services and health benefits. It was a slow process. Yes, a very slow process. But it did begin to happen. It did begin to change. And those of us who were part of it from the beginning could only use one word to describe it: exhilarating, amazing. We opened doors that had been locked shut for years, enabling access for all of us to get these benefits that had been available to men for so long, and also to lay the groundwork for future generations of women veterans. Following the dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial and the statue of the 3 fighting men, we discovered something else. We discovered that many women who served in Vietnam shared a similar pastime. We wrote about our experiences in poems, in prose, in journal writings, but we also discovered that we never shared them with anyone, sometimes not even our therapists. We were either too embarrassed or too frightened by the depth of the feelings we were experiencing and expressing. So we were comfortable and somewhat relieved when we began to share them with each other, realizing that, in fact, we were not alone. And periodically, someone would read a poem at a conference or at a meeting with other veterans, and word began to get out that such writings existed. And people started to say, well, maybe we should collect these and put them together in a book. And Linda and I heard these rumblings, and we started talking about it, and then we decided that, well, if anybody was going to put together a book about the writings of women Vietnam veterans, it was going to be us. And we agreed we would try to collect as many of these writings as we could, put together an anthology for publication, and if we could get it published, that we would donate all the proceeds from its sale to the Vietnam Women's Memorial Project. And that we did. The book went into 2 printings. So when we made that decision, we contacted every woman veteran we knew, and we said, well, this is what we'd like to do. Would you be willing to share your articles with us? And to a person, everyone agreed. They thought it was a great idea. But they always, or many of them, not all of them, but many of them added one little caveat. The only thing I ask is I just don't want my name published alongside it. I want it to be anonymous. Linda and I understood that, and we understood their fears about that. But we also knew that if we were to accommodate them, the book would lose its value. If it was to have any meaning at all, any impact, the authors needed to be named. We needed, as a group, to own our work, that readers needed to know who we were, where we served. They needed to know that we were real women with real stories who experienced real pain, real emotional upheaval, but also real healing. For to do any less would be a disservice to ourselves and our sister, brother, and veterans. And ultimately, I'm happy to say that everyone whose work appeared in the book agreed to have their name associated with it. Thus, the book, Visions of War, Dreams of Peace, The Writings of Women in the Vietnam War, was published in the fall of 1991. And in keeping with honoring Linda, I would like to read one of her poems from that book today. And the name of that poem is Making Friends. 20 years since my life was changed. 20 years making a friend of death, knowing it, respecting it, wishing for it at times, fighting with it as friends sometimes do. But the nightmares of war have faded, and I've healed. My dreams are now of peace. Peace of mind, peace of heart, hoping for peace on earth. It's time I made a friend of life. Like so many other Vietnam veterans, Linda died before her time. On November 15, 2002, at the age of 55, from idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. Was it Agent Orange related? We'll never know. But like Linda, we will always wonder. During her life, Linda touched more lives than any of us could ever imagine, bringing hope and strength to untold numbers of veterans, men and women alike. Her passing was a tremendous loss to the veteran community. And I truly hope we never forget her and her contributions to us, and the impact she had on improving the lives of all veterans, past, present, and to come, for they were historic. And I'd like to take a minute to introduce to you Linda's daughter, Molly Buckley Stillman, who is here with us today, a young woman who Linda loved with every ounce of her body, and who we all remember as a little kid running around pizza parlors and a variety of other establishments trying to keep her out of trouble. Molly, would you please stand up in recognition of your mother?
I'm back. Before I begin my little talk here, I want to introduce to you Claire and Ed Starnes' son, Sean. He looks so much like his mother. You all know, I said before, who I was and what I do. And that I was 6'4". Well, the bus made me shrink. It is my honor today to speak to you about a woman I admire and hold in high esteem, Mary Stout. Mary, your friendship and your guidance have led me in a direction I could never have imagined. And I know I do not stand alone in this regard. Mary was born in Ohio and grew up wanted to go to college to be a teacher. But finances during that time were very tight, so she decided to go to a 3-year nursing school. The Vietnam War was waging at this time, and military recruiters visited nearly every school of nursing in the country to meet staffing needs of the war hospital. Like many, Mary entered the Army Student Nurse Program, which helped to offset her tuition, and she agreed to a 2-year enlistment. I don't know if it's an enlistment, no, in the Army Nurse Corps. After basic training, let me stop right there. There's not a nurse in this room who went through basic training. Claire and I went through basic training. The enlisted went through basic training. Y'all learned who to salute. After her indoctrination training in 1966, she landed at the 2nd Surge, first at An Khe, then Chu Lai, hoping to eventually make it home safe. She left Vietnam in 1968, and Mary never returned to nursing. She became a wife and a mother. And in 1978, a new organization was forming, Vietnam Veterans of America. Mary first heard about Agent Orange in 1981 when she joined VVA Chapter 16 in Columbus, Ohio. The veterans had questions about their health and the chemicals they were exposed to while serving in the war. It was at this time Mary learned of the use of dioxin in Vietnam, which VVA had been investigating since 1979. As a chapter member, she learned of the multitude of issues and challenges facing her fellow Vietnam veterans. In 1985, Mary was elected as the VVA National Secretary. She immersed herself into righting the wrongs of federal bureaucracy, ill-prepared to address the multitude needs of our nation's newest veterans. At VVA's National Convention in 1987, because she never stopped, she became, are you ready? The first woman ever elected as a president of a National Veterans Service Organization. She was one of a kind. Early on, Vietnam veterans had an inherent mistrust of politicians and the democratic process, yet Mary understood that in order to enact change, legislation would be required. On Capitol Hill, she was measured and adept in her approach, convincing legislators with her logic, not theirs because they don't have any, and her finesse. She strategically set her target on many of the issues burning at the heart of we Vietnam veterans: Agent Orange, POW MIAs, PTSD, oversight of services and care in the VA health system, and the overall shortfall of care programs, privacy, and security for both men and women in its system. Mary knew that all members must be educated on the issues and engage politically if VVA was to succeed and secure its goals. At all levels of the organization, legislative advocacy was promoted as a tool to accomplish change. Even as our then 35,000, now 99,000 member organization, VVA proved it was already a force with which to be reckoned. Under Mary's leadership, VVA fought to ensure the vet centers remained separate from the VA medical centers, secured the establishment of the VA centers for women veterans, and brought the delivery of justice to veterans by fostering the creation of the VA Veterans Court of Appeals to allow for judicial review of beneficial decisions and delivered a greater awareness of the health effects of Agent Orange and dioxin on Vietnam veterans and their families. Collaborative work with the National Veterans Legal Service Project, or NVLSP, eventually landed a major success in January '91 with the passage of the Agent Orange Act. Thank you, Mary, for all the inspiration, strength, encouragement, and direction you have provided to so many over your lifetime of veteran advocacy and service. It has been your passion, but it was to the benefit of all veterans, men and women alike, that you were at the helm during these trying and frustrating years. You met the challenge with grace, gaining respect of untold numbers of veterans who remain indebted to you for your commitment to us all. Thank you, my friend. Mary, please stand.
On behalf of our president, Jack McManus, it has been our privilege to share this time with you. In the weeks ahead, VVA will bring to you on its website more stories of incredible Vietnam women veterans. They too have contributed to our extraordinary path into the future. And just to name a few, they include Lily Adams, Leslie Feldstein, Sarah McVicker, Leanne Coombs, and Cheryl Nicole, just to name a few. As written by the Dalai Lama, in giving others wings to fly, we contribute to our own destiny. It's my belief that in giving of ourselves, in a general, genuine, loving spirit, that we strengthen our own souls. It provides us with a reason for our existence as members of the human race. Before turning this over to our National Vice President, Tom Burke, I'd like to leave you with, to me, what I feel is a very poignant thought. The good that we do is never lost, even if nobody notices. For goodness begets goodness in one way or another. Its force, though unseen, is unquenchable. Thank you for choosing to be here with us this afternoon. Thank you.
Now, Marcia said at the beginning that I was standing in for Jack, okay? But you got the better end of the deal. I'm much better looking than Jack. How possibly could I follow and act like these ladies? This, I tell you, you are looking at American heroes. I am so proud of all of you ladies that have served with us, because I can tell you that without question, they were our angels. They served with honor, they served with graciousness, and they did their duty to their country. They returned and they did their duty to their communities. They returned and did their duty with Vietnam Veterans of America. We owe them a big round of applause. It was 30 years ago when the women of Vietnam came to Washington and established the Vietnam Veterans Women's Memorial. I want to thank the memorial for asking me to come here and to talk to you today. I want to thank the memorial for accommodating the program in this space and working with us as we plan the event. Our women veterans, ladies and gentlemen, are amazing. They are a patriotic group to our country. People have to remember that ladies do a lot of work, and they do it well. There are many ladies in the audience that served. If you would just all stand, any military lady in the audience, stand for a minute, please. I have a duty to do here to pass out some very small tokens of our appreciation to the ladies being honored here today. So, thank you, take care.